where are we picking up, Beau?
Yeah, no, just there then, when I suppose he gets news that Jaffa is being besieged or re-sieged.
Yeah.
Retaken, so he wants to retake it.
Yeah.
Isn't a lot of his advisors say it's just forget about it, it's not a good idea, it's not worth it.
Yeah, because I mean, what happens is he gets word, and so he sails down the coast, and half of his army marches down the coast, or more than half of his army marches down the coast, and they get intercepted by some Kurds or something, and so they don't make it in time, and so Richard just sails up with whatever contingent he has on his boats, and as they're approaching, it looks like all is lost because the Muslims have got their banners over the town, and so they're like, okay, well, there's just no point, and some bishop or priest climbs down out of the citadel, drops the sand, just runs through the Muslim lines and swims out to Richard's boat to say, no, we've got 500 men trapped in the citadel, and if you don't come and save them, well, obviously we're all going to die. And Richard, on hearing this, just essentially just throws a bit of a weird berserk tantrum. And he's just like, right, that's it, we're going in. And so his ship is the first to land on the beach, and he's just first out in his deck sandals with a sword and a crossbow. And he just starts charging up the beach into the Muslims. It's one of these sort of unusual contested landings. Because in the ancient world, actually, most landings weren't contested because you didn't know where the hell the guys were going to turn up. But they were all there on the beach, and Richard went straight for them. And so Richard's motley crew is desperate to try and catch up with him as he's there just rampaging through the Saracen lines.
It's him and just a very small number of men to begin with.
It's
very,
incredibly
very
small.
number.
Can I read a bit from Harold Lamb?
Yeah,
this is great. If I didn't turn my thing off. He says, "The Red Galley was the first to grate upon the sand. It lurched and rolled in the swell, while the Muslims yelled their hatred and the swarthy Italian shipmen crossed themselves and snatched up bows and axes. Richard gave no more orders, and tarried not to bring any reason into the madness of this landfall. He jumped over the side, waist deep in the water. He still wore his ship's slippers and no other armour than a mail shirt and a steel cap. On his shoulders he gripped a crossbow, and his longsword hung at his side. Wading through the swell, he began to shoot bolts at the Muslims, with Peter of Prieu and another knight beside him. When they came out of the water, they drew their swords, lashing about them under the arrows that the shipmen piled from the prow. Recognizing the king, the Muslims in front of him gave back hastily, while the English hastened forward to form a shield ring around him. Other galleys were running up on the beach, the crews casting beams and benches ashore. They caught these up and carried these forward, lugging small skiffs and riffraff onto the beach to form a barricade of sorts. But Richard was not within the barricade. Taking a shield from a man, he ran across the beach to a postern gate in the wall and stair that he remembered led to the Templars' house, in Jaffa. With his knights clattering after him, he leaped up the stairs, and the Arab looters in the alleys yelled in amazement at the sight of this dripping figure that strode among them. Richard cleared the alleys and pounded at the gate of the citadel until the garrison became aware of him. By then his galleys held the beach, and his men were streaming up the Templar stairs. His banner went up on the tower of the citadel. The knights of the garrison took new heart at his coming. They sallied forth and began to drive the disorganized Muslims towards the gates of the outer town. Then Bahar ad-Din, this is the Muslim chronicler who was with Saladin's army at the time, relates, "Charging in a mass on our men, they drove them out of the town. The gate was so clogged by the fleeing that many lost their lives. A throng of pillagers who followed the army had lingered in some churches and occupied with deeds that should not be mentioned. The Franks forced their way in and killed them and made them prisoners." This all took about less than an hour, and afterwards, after driving the Muslims out of Jaffa, we get a sort of tally of what Richard actually has with him, and it's a really, really, really small army. He has 55 knights, a few hundred men-at-arms, and 2,000 bowmen. Saladin has 10,000 horsemen. So Richard's outnumbered probably 3 to 4 to 1, something like that. And he's not very well organised and not very well armed. So it's a good job for an hour in the morning.
Yeah, think about what you just said there, where he jumps out first, runs in the city first, almost on his own, or with just a small, very small number, like a dozen guys or something with him.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's obviously not suicidal, but it's it's sort of suicidal. It's
to anyone else that would be suicidal.
There's a story where Alexander jumps over a wall first on his own.
Yeah.
It's that sort of level of the grey line between bravery and actual madness.
Yeah. Same with Pyrrhus at Eryx, where he's the first over the wall and he's throwing guys over the wall. It's like, you're in charge.
Yeah.
If you die, the whole thing collapses.
Yeah. I've heard it somewhere, a chronicler, I think from the Muslim side, thought that they saw this happening and they thought, well, that can't be it. It can't just be him. He must be the vanguard of a much larger force.
Yeah.
He must be, because no one would do that. Nobody in their right mind would ever do what we're seeing is happening before our very eyes. So it must be, there must be thousands and thousands of more men sort of just out of sight or something.
Yeah, we just can't see them.
But it's not.
No.
And get from Richard's side, or from the Crusader side of things, it's like, again, like he's a tank or something, or like he's absolutely convinced he's indestructible.
Yeah.
You might have had it once or twice in your life when I don't know if you're in a fight or playing rugby or something, I don't know, where you're in the right frame of mind.
You're just in the zone.
You're just in the zone and you think, no, nothing can touch me, nothing can hurt me. I am sort of untouchable at this moment in time. Of course you're not, no one is really, but if you're in the right headspace and you sort of live it, it sort of becomes true. He must have been in that frame of mind at that point, or just prepared to die.
He seems to be in that frame of mind every time an opportunity for a fight happens. Like whenever an opportunity for a fight happens, you could, accept it or decline it. And every time Richard has accepted it already and is already engaged, while everyone else is desperately trying to catch up with whatever he's doing. And this is just a persistent feature that everyone reports about him. So I'm going to accept that this is probably a historical fact. Richard was bonkers and loved to fight. Just loved it.
There's another thing where I've heard that for medieval knights, or early medieval knights anyway, if you are completely covered up in your armour and you've got all your armour on and all your plate mail and everything, you are in a way not indestructible, but it's very hard to actually take you down. And you can take knocks, and if you get unlucky, if an arrow or something goes through a particular chink in your arm or where the plates meet, and it's, you're not indestructible, but you're close to it. But in that account, Richard didn't.
He's just wearing a chain shirt.
He didn't have all his plate mail, all the full gear on.
No.
So that you can't even say that.
I think there's something about momentum that we're not counting here, because I think when you're moving, the people you're dealing with don't have time to line up the perfect attack or whatever, right? And so if you just keep moving and going forward and pushing them back and making them react to what you're doing, then you've got the initiative, you've got the momentum, and so you can kind of steamroll your way through things. And it feels that that's very much how Richard conducts battles, basically.
No, that's a massive thing.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, that's a massive thing, not just in battle, but also like, in rugby or American football or something.
Any
Guy with
competition.
momentum has massively got the advantage of it. And there's accounts from all sorts of wars. Again, it springs to mind stuff from World War II, the Battle of the Bulge, where sometimes someone would just sprint through the enemy lines and then sprint back. And people, this is like a combination of they're shocked of what they're even seeing. And that sort of can be enough sometimes. Yeah. That you get away with it because it's so over the top crazy.
And no one's prepared. Like, because that's the thing, you have to be, like, to get the message to Richard that people are still alive, someone had to run out just through all the Muslim lines and just get out. But if no one's like, oh, well, what's happened? Oh, what's going on? Like, this is what momentum is. When you're taking action and other people aren't prepared for it, then they can't meet it with anything. And honestly, it seems like that's how Richard just charges into everything. It's like, I'm actually just going to just full on charge, swinging a giant sword. And they're not really going to be prepared for this. Like, yeah, I guess they're not.
Yeah.
I guess they're not.
And I've seen it happen in paintball. Someone sprints through the enemy base and they've taken the flag and it's sort of too quick to react in a way.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of, it's happened. It's just already happened.
Yeah.
And that can happen even in modern wars with guns and stuff. Yeah. So, let alone when it's just bows and arrows and sword play more often than not. That's just one of those examples where it's sort of, it's really well documented, well chronicled, that incident, that event. And
it's well chronicled by his enemies. That's the thing. It's the chronicler is Bahar ad-Din, who's one of Saladin's chroniclers. So there's no reason they'd be like, oh yes, we're going to give a glowing write-up to this Crusader king. There's no particular reason they'd want to do that.
Yeah.
So the fact that we get such a glowing write-up from them kind of implies to me that this is a fairly reliable account.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But anyway, so after this quite stunning victory, because this happened in, he says, the course of about an hour. It's like, okay, great. So, it took us days to take this city, and Richard's just driven us out of it in an hour. So we'll send some envoys to Richard, who's still in his armor and, ship sandals. And he basically says to them, look, tell Saladin, I don't want to be the pharaoh of this land. What I want is just a church in Jerusalem that people can go to, which they do. And that buys them, I think it's like 3 days on the beach outside of Jaffa. But on the third day at dawn, a contingent of Kurds begin attacking the Crusader camp. And this is what the Battle of Jaffa is in its entirety. I've got quite a long quote, but it's so good. And again, the source for this is the Muslim chronicler. So Harold Lamb tells us, the dim flashing yonder under the lightening sky came from polished helmets and men and horses that were moving towards the camp. The Genoese ran back towards the tents, shouting, arms, arms! Sentries called out questions, and the nearest sleepers roused. The Genoese ran on, stumbling over the ropes, and tall figures came from the tents to question him. An order was given, and the horn blared. Knights ran up, pulling mail coifs over their head, and knotting sword girdles about their hips. Some of them had not stopped to don breeches or hose, and their legs shone white in the murk. King Richard appeared among them in full mail, his Danish axe swinging above his head. A horse was led up, and he mounted hastily. The quiet Earl of Leicester and his companions followed his example without ado. There were only 10 horses, and in the darkness a man took what he found. Even these makeshift chargers, sorry nags, some of them, which did not know a lance from a cart pole, were better than no horses. The sky lightened in the east, and with the first yellow of sunrise, men said that Muslims were advancing in squadrons, slowly. Either they had heard the Christians stir, or they did not like to charge until they could see something. Beyond the church, on the other side of the town, the horns of the Genoese and Pisans sounded. Richard had Normans and English with him. Under his sharp commands, they ranged themselves in a half circle, spreading from the church to the shore. The men of the outer rank went down on their right knees, holding their shields slanted from the ground in their left hands. Their right hands held lances, the butts wedged in the ground, iron heads pointing outwards. Between every pair of lances, a crossbowman took his place, with another standing behind him, to load an extra piece and pass it forward. So that's quite an interesting description of the defensive formation, actually. Makes a lot of sense. Your enemy is entirely mounted, basically. Okay, well, we'll form a shield wall, a pike wall, with literally like an early version of pike and shot. So we've got the crossbows very close. So when the horses and the Muslims repeatedly charge this wall, the men just have to stand their ground and shoot the horseman in the face with a crossbow. And then they get given another crossbow, they hand the other one back. And this is actually a really, really good defensive formation, which does incidentally hold for the entire day.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, again, it's sort of just a great moment, really. Everything that goes on at Jaffa is sort of one of the great images from the Third Crusade.
How there isn't a movie of this is crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, they wouldn't make it now because it shows us to be...
Well, yeah.
or the Europeans, at least, the Franks, the Latins, to be brave and immovable and stoic and badass.
Can't have an English king cutting down Muslims all over the place.
Just can't depict that.
Yeah,
it's just not allowed. No, it's great because Richard knows, he will have already made up his mind on some level that he's not going to be here for another 2 years, 3 years, or any time. He's got to go back very soon. So he sort of needs to make a stand, make a point.
Yeah.
He needs to bring Saladin to the table, so to speak. So it's sort of, it's desperate though. I mean, we know that it holds and it's sort of a bit of a semi-glorious moment, but you don't know that in the moment. No. You might just be cut to pieces that day.
No.
It would have been quite desperate, or very desperate, really. And
you're outnumbered 3 to 4 to 1 by horsemen as well. So it's entirely likely you're going to get cut to pieces this day. And Richard seems to enjoy the idea. Because Richard, as he carries on, along their rank rode King Richard. Outlined against the red dawn, they heard his voice. Stand fast, valiant men, do not give ground, the enemy are around us, and to flee is to die. His voice went away, and the Muslims charged with a sudden burst of sound and trampling hoofs on hard ground. They came direct for the red banner of the lion, and the crossbows whirred in their faces. The horses crashed into the spears, and the clatter of swords was heard. The charge did not break the sturdy spearmen, and the Muslims wheeled off. Other waves charged, but under the sting of the iron bolts, they turned and galloped along the front, plying their bows. Richard had not the patience to endure this for long. He led out his 10 horsemen against the clans with spears down. Just say that's wild. Like, there are thousands of these horsemen milling around firing bows, and Richard's like, I guess it's a charge then. There are 10 of us, my lord. It's like, yes, I know. I can count. He led out his 10 horsemen among the clans with spears down. The heavier knights beat their way through the Kurds, and Richard found himself beyond them. Looking around, he saw the Earl of Leicester on foot, fighting with his sword. Richard galloped over to him and covered him until he could mount a riderless horse. The melee grew thick about them, and some Turks overthrew the Knight of Morleon. They were carrying him off as a prisoner when the king saw them and charged them, lashing about them with his great axe until de Morleon was free among his own men. The Muslims drew off, and the sun flooded the plain with light. For a while there was a pause while the two sides ranged themselves anew. And in this quiet, an unarmed Turk rode up, holding high his right arm and gripping in his left the reins of 2 fine horses ready saddled. He was allowed into the lines and led to the knights, whom he explained that the horses were a gift from Al-Adil to the English king. This is the famous... it's always portrayed as if Saladin has done this, but it's not. It's his brother that's done this. But he had seen, the Sultan's brother had seen that Richard was poorly mounted. And so, of course, his knights are like, look, you can't ride that. Like, this is obviously a trap. You're not going to, like, your enemy has sent you a couple of horses, apparently because of your dignity. You're not going to ride them. They're going to carry you off into the Muslim lines, and that's it. You'll be captured. And Richard, for answer, swung himself into the saddle of one of the chargers and says, if Satan sent me a good horse this day, I would ride him, which is a great line. It's just a fantastic line. And so the battle carries on. By mid-morning, Lamb tells us that the battle is going badly for the Christians. Saladin's mounted bowmen drove at them at first in one place, then at another. The men-at-arms stood at their ground, but the galley men drifted back to the ships away from the missiles. Some of the Genoese ran into the town, and behind them the Muslim horse penetrated the gaps in the city wall. When Richard heard all of this, he rode back into Jaffa, taking with him 2 knights and a couple of archers. He dared not withdraw more men from the thin line of Normans and English. Trotting through the narrow streets among the fugitives, he came full upon 3 Turks who had bright caparisons on their horses. He dug his spurs into the Arab charger and struck down one of the Muslims with his sword, knocking a second man from the saddle. The third fled, and the archers caught the 2 horses. Seeing the king, some seamen trailed after him, and Richard fairly cleared the streets with a growing queue of retainers behind him. This done, I just want to point out, this is him personally doing all of this. Like, it's just madness. Absolute madness. This done, he seized the moment of quiet to circle down to the beach, sending his new followers to the galleys to rout out the malingerers. When the ships were cleared, he upbraided the throng, telling off 5 men to guard each vessel. With the rest, he went back into the city, mustering wounded and unarmed men to pile stones within the breaches of the crumbling wall. Then he led the fugitives out to the fighting line. Here he dared not rest. The Muslims were still attacking. With his dozen horsemen, Richard sallied out and broke up a charge. Still, he pressed on, his great sword swinging over his head. He left his companions and went forward, disappearing among the Muslims. Some Turks closed around him, and he beat them off. A single officer charged at him with a gallop, bending low in the saddle, his round shield raised and his scimitar swinging. As he came, he mocked those who hung back before the king. "Make way," he shouted, "O dogs, make way for a man." Richard saw him and wheeled his charger, rising in his stirrups to strike once with his sword. The long blade split the light shield and bit through the man's throat, turning against the bones of his chest. With the head, the Muslim's shoulder and arm flew off, and his body dropped lifeless before the ground. And that's the end of the Battle of Jaffa.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.